Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the United Nations doing to focus attention on eliminating poverty, reducing hunger, and to combat climate change? My guest today is someone who's involved with one of the 6 organs of the UN that's intimately involved in dealing with all these issues. My guest today is His Excellency Peter Thomson. His Excellency Ambassador Peter Thomson is Fiji's permanent representative to the United Nations. Ambassador Thomson is also the president of the 71st United Nations General Assembly. Mr. President, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you. We do this quite periodically anyway, yes. Yeah. You're president of the General Assembly, and of course the General Assembly is one of the 6 major organs of the UN. You have the Security Council, you have the International Court of Justice, the Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, and the Secretariat. And you are in charge of the town hall of the world, really. The 193 countries of the world, all the countries, so to speak, are members of the General Assembly. What are some of the main responsibilities of the General Assembly?
Well, you mentioned the 6. I was very impressed that you got them. I was trying to count them down. And the Trusteeship Council was the one that I couldn't remember, but well done. The General Assembly is the only one of all those organs, and they, of course, are all part of the Charter of the United Nations, which was signed 7 decades ago in San Francisco. They all get their existence from the Charter, but the General Assembly is the only one of them that is universal, which includes all of the member states of the United Nations, and that's 193 member states now, much bigger number than when we started out 7 decades ago. So the General Assembly is where the permanent representatives from each of the 193 member states sit with their delegations, and we deliberate on world affairs. We pass resolutions, basically. That's what we do, and the resolutions guide member states on their behavior on certain issues, like anything from human trafficking through to gender issues, and basically everything that world governance encapsulates comes through the General Assembly.
Pick a tough topic and you're dealing with it. No doubt about it. It's on your list of things to do. Yeah. The General Assembly, now you have, as we mentioned, 193 countries. You have basically every country in the world, every language is spoken, every religious entity is represented to some degree, every moray and folkway is represented. That must be a tremendous logistical challenge to bring all 193 countries together. And the General Assembly does accomplish quite a bit, but yes, that's got to be a logistical challenge, is it not?
I think the challenge would be specifically for people that don't speak the 6 official languages. Mm-hmm. But obviously you select people to represent your country who speak one of them, and there's English and French and Chinese, Russian, Spanish, and I'm missing one. Arabic, well done. You're better. I can do 5. I can't do 6 on these things.
I'm glad you started. Thank you.
So that would be, linguistically. And I remember when I was chairman of the Group of 77, which was the 134 developing countries, and somebody was apologizing to me for their bad English when they were making an intervention. They said, I'm really sorry, I don't speak the other languages, but I'm really bad in English too. And I stopped him right there and said, you never apologize for that, because we don't speak your language, and shame on us. Whereas you are speaking my language, English. So I'm the one who should apologize, not you. And I think language is the number one problem, I'd say. The other problems of culture and so on, look, the United Nations is a very big church, and we make room for everybody here. Mm-hmm. So I don't encounter any particular problems.
It is certainly a big church, a big tent, everybody's under it. Well, if our viewers would like more information on the UN, they can go to www.un.org and tap into the General Assembly, the Security Council, or any other part of the UN. One thing before we get off that, though, for the last, 20 years now at least, or 15, The UN is focused on efficiency and effectiveness, streamlining, that type of thing. Do you have any initiatives underway to streamline the General Assembly, to make it a more effective organization?
Yeah, look, the new Secretary General, who's just taken up office at the beginning of this year, Antonio Guterres, he has been given a mandate. In fact, he's accepted the challenge of reforming the organization. And you know, it's in all our interests that we do reform. We all want value for money. It costs a lot, obviously, to maintain an organization like this, a necessary organization like this. But reform is necessary to keep everything cost effective, but also to make sure that we're doing the best possible job we can, that we are fit for purpose for the great challenges of the 21st century.
That's extremely important. Now, one very important issue, there are many that you're dealing with, but one is this whole concept of the Sustainable Development Goals that really were built on top of the Millennium Development Goals. But what exactly, what's the concept of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals?
The Sustainable Development Goals, you know, if I back the truck up, I've been in development pretty much all my life. My postgraduate degree is in development studies. I was a district officer in Fiji from 1971, just working on rural development. And the missing word in development up until recent times was sustainable. Because what good is growth and development if it's taking you to an unsustainable future? A world where we've all grown so much in terms of population or infrastructure that we've outstripped our food supplies, or we have you know, run out of the raw materials necessary for all this growth. So the sustainable development is the watchword now, because we came to realize that humanity actually is living in an unsustainable way. If you look, if you project into the future, we can't continue consuming and producing the way we are, or we will get to a point of unsustainability. And there is no better example of that than climate change.
Exactly. And of course, the Sustainable Development Goals are 17 logical, practical, measurable goals to eliminate poverty, to eliminate hunger, to promote gender equality. And of course, goal I think 13 is to promote climate, or to combat climate change,
yes.
And 14 is to conserve the oceans. Yep. Let's talk about climate change, because a lot of scientists believe that that is the #1 problem that's affecting the planet, all 7.3 billion people. That we have many other problems, but if we lose the planet, we've lost it completely. We've lost our home, so to speak. You are chairing, you're promoting really a major conference. I want to make sure I get this right. A high-level action event on climate change and sustainable development agenda on March 23rd. What is the purpose of that conference, and what do you hope will come out of it?
Okay. Well, I certainly agree with those climate change scientists who say that this is the major challenge of our time. Climate change obviously affects everything from agriculture to the state of the ocean to you know, food supplies, the risk, you know, through fire and desertification and so on. Climate change is going to affect everything in terms of our sustainability. So we have two measures which are going to save us on this planet. One is the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and the second is the Sustainable Development Goals. You take those two together and we implement those two faithfully, and our future for our grandchildren will be fine. But we have to implement them faithfully. Now, the bad news at the moment is that on climate change, the good news is we've got the Paris Climate Change Agreement, we know what to do. The bad news is that we're still trending towards a 3 to 4 degree world, which is unsustainable. You only have to talk to the insurance industry to know that that is not sustainable. They can't function once you get above 3 degrees. So all our work there is to try and keep to below 2 degrees, and that's what we're working on now. So the other process is the SDGs, as you mentioned, the Sustainable Development Goals, and one of them, SDG 13, is also about climate change. So marrying those two, making sure that we're working together seamlessly, is the point of the March 23rd meeting here in New York, Why do we need to get that seamlessness? It's because the UNFCCC process, which is the climate change process, which is based in Bonn in Germany, and is the secretariat for the COP process that the Paris Climate Change Agreement came out of, and we have these COPs every year. That what they're doing is fully married with what we're doing here in New York at the United Nations under SDG 13. And in particular on that day on March 23rd, when we bring the two streams together, we'll be looking at the ways that climate change affects those other SDGs, in particular, say, the SDG on energy, or the SDG on food production, or the SDG on health, the SDG on oceans, because climate change affects all of those SDGs. So that's what we'll be addressing at this high-level meeting on March 23rd.
And as you mentioned so importantly, that climate change really, I mean, that all these 17 Sustainable Development Goals are linked, but climate change is a cross-cutting goal that ties them all together.
Definitely.
And if we really need to focus on that. Would you, again, I would encourage our viewers to go to UN.org, because we'll find out what comes out of this conference and find out what some of the recommendations are. But it's important to continue the role that the UN has played. The UN has really been a convener on this climate change issue. Former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon that was one of his 5 major goals. In fact, it was probably goal number 1, I guess. And the UN brought together the countries of the world, the private sector, the non-governmental organizations, like Rotary, like Lions, different groups like that, to focus attention. But we have to do this together, do we not?
Absolutely. I personally believe in the power of the individual as being the critical factor for the success of not just the SDGs, but also for the climate change agreement. Governments, yes, they're very important. Obviously, they have to set the frameworks, but I really think that it's the individual and the community that the individual lives in, be that a family or a village or a town or a city or a state, that these are the communities that actually make the difference, because they're the ones that choose whether to go solar, they're the ones who choose whether to be driving CO2 emitting cars, etc. Right? So for me, the big job has been education, and connecting to the individual. And one of the reasons I'm very optimistic about success is the huge progress that's being made in connectivity around the world. The fact that within a decade, every human being on this planet will have access to the internet. So we'll be able to get to every human being in terms of the rights and the responsibilities that they have to implement this new sustainable way of life that these 2 agreements call for.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to our website, www.globalconnectionstelevision.com, and go to the video gallery to look at some of our previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of media outlet, be it a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps you're involved with an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a website and you just have an interest in this type of programming, you're invited to go to the website and download it. Global Connections Television is provided free of charge at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're taking a look at a very important organ of the United Nations, the General Assembly, and how it's dealing, along with many other folks, with major problems, especially climate change, conserving the oceans, and many others. My guest today is an expert on all of these topics. My guest today is His Excellency Peter Thomson. His Excellency Peter Thomson is the Fijian ambassador to the United Nations, and he is also the president of the 71st United Nations General Assembly. Mr. President, we're talking about that one conference, the one on March 23rd. There's another one coming up June 5th through the 9th, and it's on Sustainable Development Goal number 14. Correct. What is Sustainable Development Goal number 14, and why is this conference important?
Okay, Sustainable Development Goal 14 is what's called the Oceans Goal. And it came into being because countries like Fiji and others, island countries, realized that when the Sustainable Development Goals were being formed, that we should fight for the inclusion of something for the sake of the ocean. Why? Because it was clear to us from scientific evidence that life in the ocean was under threat, be it through marine pollution, be it through declining fish stocks, degraded coastal ecosystems, ocean acidification, deoxygenization of the ocean warming. The ocean is in deep, deep trouble. And all of these troubles are brought upon the ocean by mankind. So we realized that it was time for a moment of accountability, and that by getting SDG 14 into the Sustainable Development Goals, we could not only address oceans problems, but also have this time of accountability. And the first time of accountability will be this ocean conference, which is being held here at the United Nations, 5 to 9 June. The whole week, this UN campus will be turned over to nothing but looking after the welfare of the ocean. And so I'm glad to say the ocean community has embraced it. There's a lot of enthusiasm for what we've got coming up in June.
It may be fair to say that the ocean, the waters, are the lifeblood of our planet, because if we lose those, we're certainly in a very sorry state of affairs, and we have to maintain these oceans. And we see the fish supplies are diminishing. We see there's more pollution. We have plastic islands floating around, especially in your area of the world, over in the Pacific. When I was thinking, as you were talking about this, I thought Fiji. I thought back to 2016, I believe in February, you had that horrible cyclone Winston that came through. That just devastated Fiji. Now, Fiji is a smaller country, I think 900,000 population, more or less. First off, how devastating, if we could digress for a moment to Fiji, how devastating was that cyclone, and did scientists link it to climate change? We're seeing more and more of that.
You know, the scientists have been telling us for a long time that we should expect more unpredictable, in other words, not following traditional paths of cyclones. That they will be more frequent and they will be stronger. Well, that's exactly what we're starting to see now in the South Pacific. In fact, we're seeing it all around the world, but in the South Pacific, last year Vanuatu was devastated by a monster storm. This year in February it was Fiji's turn, and this storm came at us from a direction which has never come before, in a directly east to west direction, and it was the strongest tropical cyclone ever to make landfall in the southern hemisphere. And it went right through the middle of Fiji, so you can imagine the terrible damage that occurred, loss of lives, over 40 people died. People are still living in tents now. So many of our schools were flattened, and if I could make a plea to your viewers, because I know that those schools are still in need of assistance, and there is a program to assist the schools. It's Adopt a School, and anybody can do that, and there have been great people around the world who've done that. So if you just get onto your search engines and have a look at that, Fiji's still in dire need of rebuilding, and that is a direct result of climate change.
And hopefully our viewers will lend a hand, because we could be next, and we really need to do this. And as you mentioned, the storms are becoming more frequent and they're becoming more violent. And we saw that with Hurricane Sandy, possibly back to Katrina. We see that climate change, the glaciers are melting, the oceans are rising. Bangladesh is predicted to lose something like 20% of its land mass within the next 10 or 12 years, which is going to be devastating, because that's one of the most densely populated planets on the Earth. So
well, you know, as the planet warms with climate change, as you know, the ice caps are melting, and there's nowhere for the water to go but into the ocean. And of course, the water itself is expanding because of the heating, and in fact, the ocean is the great absorber of the growing heat on the planet. But there's a limit to what it can do. But with that expansion of water, it's like you imagine in the bath, right? There's only one way for the water to go, and that's up. And that's where you get your rising sea levels from. Tragedy for our area, of course, where countries like Kiribati and Tuvalu, you know, countries which where societies have lived for thousands of years, are going to go underwater, totally underwater. And then if you extrapolate that to places like Bangladesh, you've got deltas currently hosting 30 million people just in that one country, 30 million people whose farms will all go underwater. So where do people go? You know, I mean, you have to see migration as the twin of climate change in the 21st century.
And of the 60 million refugees the UN High Commission for Refugees is working with right now, many of them are climate change refugees.
That's true.
They're forced away from their areas, from their habitat.
Yes. Well, you know, climate change, and when you look at things like desertification and you know, drying up of traditional water supplies and so on, is not just a driver for migration, because it's the obvious thing to do. If it was you and your kids, you're not going to stick around if there's no more water. You've got to go and take them somewhere safe. But it's also a big driver for conflict.
Exactly, yes. And we see even in countries like Bolivia, up in the Altiplano, the glaciers are melting, they're disappearing, and what are the indigenous people who live up there going to do? They're going to go to the lower levels. They have to. They have no choice. Before we get off this June 5th and 9th conference, this is so extremely important. Is this more of an informational conference to bring the parties that have an interest and have the resources, or do you want recommendations to come out of it?
It's a lot more than that.
It's much more.
You know, I see three phases when you're trying to fix a problem. One is you've got to get awareness about what the problem is and get everybody to understand it. So that's the first thing, and I think we're already starting to get that global consciousness on the problems of the ocean. You know, I've been following it now for 7 years, and really the momentum is really building towards June. I can see that. So that's great. We've got that first thing. The second thing is to get pledges, and we're calling them voluntary commitments, but we've got, if you go to our website, the Ocean Conference, you'll see on there a register for voluntary commitments. And of course we're expecting the good and the great, you know, the big countries and the United Nations agencies like FAO and UNEP and all the rest, to all register their voluntary commitments about what they're going to do to fix the problems. But we also want all of humanity to be registering what they're going to do. And I was in Indonesia last week, and I met some young girls, actually, that started off when they were 12 and 10. They're now 16 and 18, a couple of sisters, who have a beach litter project where they collect beach litter, and their project proliferated all through Indonesia. They started off from a school in Bali, but now they've got 7 countries that are a part of this program. So what I'm hoping is that on this register of voluntary commitments, that anybody who gets onto that website, sees it, sees what we're trying to do, realizes that in their community they can do this or that to support SDG 14, be it marine pollution or something related to fisheries or coastal degradation, whatever it is that they think that they can do to help, register their voluntary commitments. So that's the second phase, get the pledges. And then, of course, the third phase is action. Make sure that we're doing what we're doing. So we will get alongside people, the groups of people that are on that register of voluntary commitments, helping them along in the years ahead. And then we'll need to have periodic moments of accountability, probably through conferences like the June one, between now and 2030, which is when SDG 14 matures.
And action and implementation are critical.
Exactly.
The goals are laudable, they're lovely, but if we
Exactly.
don't implement them, what have we accomplished? Absolutely nothing. So
Gotta do
that's
it.
very true. In the last 30 seconds or so we have, what role can the media play to help us better understand these issues?
You know, when I was out in Silicon Valley a few weeks ago, I went out there really to challenge them as to how they could help us get the message of the Sustainable Development Goals across. If a celebrity falls down and grazes her knee, the whole world seems to know about it within, you know, 12 hours. And here we have a master plan to save this planet for our grandchildren, the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. And I'm convinced 90% of the world has never heard of them. So I think the role for the media is to help us get the message out there. This is not trivial stuff. This is about the welfare of your grandchildren on this planet. And if the media can help us get that message out. 17 goals may seem like a lot of goals, but when you're talking about saving the world, I think we did pretty well to limit it to that.
They were very important, and we need to focus upon them. And you're absolutely right. We all have a role to play. It doesn't, for example, Fiji. Fiji's a small country, but you're a major player at the United Nations. Fiji is a major player here. You've had Fijian troops in United Nations peacekeeping operations. You've been involved in a lot of other UN activities, but you're one of 193 countries at the UN. But still, we all have a role that we can play, and we need to do it as soon as we possibly can. But President Peter Thomson, President of the 71st General Assembly, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.